You know that feeling. I mean, I know you know it because we have all been there.
Yeah.
You study a foreign language for years. You've got, like, the streaks going on your phone apps, you're watching foreign films with the subtitles turned off, and you can casually scroll through the morning news in that language and understand almost everything.
All right, you feel totally prepared.
Exactly. But then, the real-world moment arrives. A native speaker looks you in the eye, smiles, and asks a totally simple, everyday question.
Hmm.
And suddenly, your brain just it turns into a desert.
Oh, yeah, total freeze.
The words completely vanish, your throat tightens. It's just endless, dry, empty sand. You just stand there blinking. And, this is what the language community calls the 5-year silence.
Which is an incredibly common phenomenon. And frankly, it's just devastating for the learner's confidence. You put in hundreds of hours of work, but the machinery just completely seizes up when you're called upon to actually perform in the real world.
So in today's deep dive, we are really going to get to the bottom of this. We're unpacking the real biological reasons behind this mute foreign language epidemic. We're also going to look at some wild historical solutions, specifically the extreme reading and imitation techniques of a 19th century polyglot who mastered 18 languages.
Yeah, his story is wild.
It really is. And finally, we'll compare the traditional mechanical way we learn languages in school to the highly social, incredibly effective method of a modern-day carpet cleaner who speaks over 50 languages.
We really are looking at a fantastic stack of sources today, because by exploring the absolute extremes of human cognition and social behavior, we can sort of reverse engineer what actually works for the average learner.
Okay, so let's unpack this core mystery first. Why is it that we can possess this massive vocabulary on paper but zero words come out of our mouths when another human being actually speaks to us?
To understand that, we really have to strip away the illusion of what learning actually is. The biggest trap is confusing recognition with retrieval.
Okay, recognition versus retrieval.
Right. When you're studying, they feel like the exact same process, but biologically, they're completely different cognitive muscles.
It's like being a world-class food critic versus being the head chef on a Friday night.
Right.
Like, when I'm reading a book in French, the words are just served to me. I know what tastes good,
Exactly.
but that doesn't mean I have the muscle memory to chop the onions and fire the grill under pressure.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Recognition is totally passive. Your brain receives a signal, like a word on a page, it matches it to an existing memory, and it decodes it.
Right.
But speaking is retrieval. You are the chef. You're under immense time pressure. Your brain has to actively search the archives for the correct vocabulary, assemble the grammatical structure on the fly, and then physically coordinate your vocal cords, tongue, and lips to produce strange new sounds.
It's a lot of work.
It is. You simply cannot build the active retrieval muscle by only training the passive recognition muscle. It's like having a massive library, but you never go to the gym to build the strength to actually carry the books.
Okay, that makes logical sense. But I feel like there's more to it than just lack of practice, right?
Yeah.
Because even when I do know the word, in that exact moment with the native speaker, I feel physical panic.
Oh, absolutely. You're experiencing what linguist Stephen Krashen identified as the affective filter.
The affective filter.
Yeah. We often brush this off as just, performance anxiety, but it's actually a severe biological roadblock. High levels of anxiety and the fear of social judgment, they don't just make you nervous. They literally block language acquisition and output in the brain.
Wait, what's actually happening in the brain when that filter goes up?
Well, it's an evolutionary survival mechanism. When you're terrified of looking foolish, especially after studying for 5 years, carrying this heavy expectation that you, quote unquote, should be fluent by now, your stress levels spike.
Right, the pressure is on.
Exactly. So your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, perceives social embarrassment as a literal threat to your survival.
Wow, literally a threat.
Yeah, it triggers a mild fight or flight response. And when that happens, your brain reroutes energy away from complex cognitive tasks. It physically restricts the neural pathways to Broca's area. That's the region in the frontal lobe responsible for speech production.
So you're literally biologically incapable of speaking fluently in that state.
You really are. The drawbridge is pulled up.
But wait, I have to challenge this whole dynamic. Aren't adults supposed to be smarter, faster learners?
Yeah.
I mean, we always hear this narrative that 8-year-old kids are just these magical sponges who soak up languages without trying.
Wait, while adults are doomed to sweat over flashcards and suffer from this amygdala panic.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is perhaps the greatest myth in modern language learning, and it fundamentally misunderstands adult neuroplasticity. Yeah. There's a landmark 1978 Harvard study in our sources by a psycholinguist named Catherine Snow that tackled this exact assumption. Her team took 5 different age groups of native English speakers, ranging from toddlers to mature adults. They all moved to the Netherlands and started learning Dutch from scratch, completely immersed in the exact same environment.
Okay, so a totally level playing field. If the sponge theory is true, the toddlers should have dominated. What actually happened?
By the end of the first 3 months, the adults and the older teenagers absolutely crushed the younger children in every single metric.
No way.
Yes, pronunciation, vocabulary acquisition, grammatical comprehension, the adults won across the board.
Wait, the adults won on pronunciation too.
They did. Because adults have mature prefrontal cortexes. We possess the power of explicit learning. If you teach an adult a grammar rule, they can instantly conceptualize it and apply it to 100 new vocabulary words.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, an 8-year-old child doesn't have that abstract reasoning yet. The child needs to hear that rule naturally repeated dozens, sometimes hundreds of times in context to internalize it. So, per hour of study, the adult brain is a vastly superior language learning machine.
Wow. Okay, so if our brains are biologically better equipped to learn the mechanics, why are we the ones stuttering and sweating in the coffee shop while the 8-year-old is outside chattering away with the local kids?
It comes back to the ego. That is the adult learner's Achilles heel. An 8-year-old child does not care about losing face. If they conjugate a verb wrong and someone laughs, they just keep playing the game.
They just brush it off.
Right. But as adults, we are paralyzed by our own intellect. We mentally draft a sentence 3 times in our heads, run it through a spell checker, and stress about the verb tense before we ever open our mouths.
Yeah.
And that hesitation leads to what linguists call fossilization.
Fossilization.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that sounds permanent. So instead of just making a mistake and moving on, we are basically baking our errors and our hesitations into our brains.
Precisely. If you study passively for 5 years, living safely in the realm of recognition and avoiding the chaos of retrieval, your long pauses, your internal panic, and your overanalyzed mental drafts lay down permanent neural pathways.
It's like pouring fresh concrete for a sidewalk. If you keep walking over that wet cement with a crooked limp because you're scared of slipping, eventually the cement dries.
Yes.
And now, those crooked, hesitant footprints are a permanent feature of the sidewalk. You have fossilized your own silence.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. You become trapped in your own hesitation.
So how do we break out of the wet cement? If the core problem is being trapped in passive recognition and paralyzed by the adult ego, how did people master languages before Duolingo, before podcasts, before modern anxieties took over?
Well, to answer that, our sources point us to one of the most eccentric and effective figures in linguistic history, Heinrich Schliemann.
Oh man, I found the notes on Schliemann absolutely fascinating. He was a 19th century German who dropped out of school at 14 to work as a grocery apprentice. He was incredibly poor, had 0 formal higher education, but he eventually became a wealthy merchant, a famous archaeologist, and somehow managed to master 18 different languages.
And his method for mastering those languages was, frankly, brutal in its intensity.
Yeah, intense is the word.
He completely rejected traditional grammar tables and passive reading. Instead, he forced high-volume output from day one. He would read texts aloud constantly with maximum volume.
Just shouting them.
Yeah. He would write daily essays on topics he actually cared about, pay someone to correct them, memorize the corrected text, and then recite it word for word the very next day.
And he had one ironclad rule that really stood out to me. Absolutely no translation allowed.
Yes, and if we look at the cognitive science we just discussed, we see exactly why Schliemann banned translation. When you translate, you are building a wall in your brain.
A translation wall.
Exactly. You hear a foreign word, you bounce it off the translation wall into your mother tongue, you process the meaning, you formulate a reply in your mother tongue, and then you bounce it back over the wall into the foreign language. It introduces massive cognitive latency.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. No wonder we freeze up.
Real fluency requires tearing down that translation wall. You have to link the foreign word directly to the concept, the physical object, or the emotion, bypassing your native language entirely. By reading aloud and reciting whole essays, Schliemann was forcing his brain to map the new language directly to his thoughts.
Okay, but my absolute favorite part of the Schliemann deep dive is his Amsterdam experiment. It really highlights just how far he was willing to go.
Yeah.
So it's the 1840s. Schliemann is living in Amsterdam and realizes he needs to learn Russian for his merchant business. But there's a huge problem. He literally cannot find a single person in Amsterdam who speaks Russian to tutor him.
Right. He was completely isolated. You had a grammar book, a dictionary, and a very poor translation of a single novel. That was it.
So he resorts to something completely absurd. He goes out and hires a poor local man, paying him 4 francs a week, just to sit in a chair in Schleiman's apartment and listen to him shout Russian texts at him for 2 hours every single day.
It's amazing.
The hired man doesn't understand a single syllable of Russian. He's just sitting there. And Schleiman actually gets evicted from his apartment twice because the neighbors couldn't stand the daily screaming.
It sounds like pure madness. But from a neurobiological perspective, it is absolute genius.
That's what I want to dig into. Because on the surface, he basically rented a wall that had ears. He hired a human accountability app.
How does yelling at someone who doesn't understand a word you're saying actually build fluency?
Because it forces multisensory integration while completely bypassing the affective filter.
Right.
Think about what is actually happening in his brain.
He's engaging his visual system by reading the text, his auditory cortex by hearing his own loud voice, and his motor cortex by physically coordinating his mouth to form strange new Russian sounds. He's firing all those synapses simultaneously, heavily working out that retrieval muscle.
But without the panic.
Yes, that is the key. The man sitting across from him couldn't judge his Russian grammar or his terrible accent, so Schleiman's amygdala never fired a threat warning. He removed the anxiety of being judged, but he kept the physical pressure of performing for an audience.
And it worked. I mean, he was negotiating complex business deals in Russian just 6 weeks later. It's an incredible testament to the power of fearless, high-volume output.
Absolutely.
But let's be real for a second. We are living in the modern world. We can't all hire strangers to sit in our living rooms while we shout at them for 2 hours a day. We would all get evicted. So how do we apply Schleiman's extreme blueprint to our lives today?
We can look at how contemporary polyglots have modernized these principles. Benny Lewis, who is an Irish engineer who famously failed at learning languages in school but later mastered over 10, operates on a core philosophy he calls speak from day one.
He also refers to this as language hacking, right? Which I think appeals to a lot of people who are just tired of textbooks.
Yes, language hacking. The underlying rule there is to deliberately shatter the perfectionism barrier. You have to accept that you will never feel quote-unquote ready to speak. So you force the output immediately. And instead of studying abstract grammar rules, Lewis advocates for building survival scripts.
I really like the concept of the survival script. It makes the task so much smaller. You aren't trying to learn the entire language. You're just writing out a 500-word introduction of yourself. Who you are, what your hobbies are, why you're visiting the country. You get a native speaker to translate it accurately, and then you just memorize it.
And this introduces the concept of learning in chunks. Instead of memorizing isolated vocabulary words like apple, car, dog, another, you memorize practical, ready-to-fire phrases.
Which vastly lowers the cognitive load. If you learn in chunks, you aren't trying to assemble a car from spare parts while driving down the highway. You're just driving a pre-built car. You have these prefabricated blocks of language ready to deploy, which makes real-time retrieval so much faster.
Exactly. But the true modern upgrade to Schleiman's method, the ultimate answer to his hired listener in Amsterdam, is generative AI, specifically conversational voice models.
Ah, of course. AI is the ultimate wall with ears.
It really is. Voice mode AI fundamentally changes the landscape because it provides a zero-pressure environment. You are forced to produce spoken output in real time, engaging those multisensory pathways, but you get infinite patience and instant accurate correction without any of the face-losing anxiety.
Right, because your ego isn't threatened by an AI.
Exactly. You can stutter, mispronounce words, and practice your survival scripts completely free of judgment.
It's the ultimate safe practice zone for the wet cement stage. Now, while we're talking about modernizing our approach, I do want to bring up Kazu, the student from Tokyo University who mastered 12 languages. His approach to memory is radically different, specifically what he calls the 9-second rule.
Right. Kazu's methodology is highly systemic, and it tackles the frustration of vocabulary retention head-on. The rule is simple. If you are looking at a flashcard or reading a text, and you cannot recall the meaning of a word within 9 seconds, you must immediately drop it and move on.
I have to push back hard on this one. If I just drop a word the second it gets difficult, aren't I just training my brain to quit? Shouldn't I grit my teeth, stare at the card, and force my brain to retrieve it to build that mental toughness?
I know it feels counterintuitive, but staring at a single word for 3 minutes is actually terrible for retention. It causes localized neural fatigue. The neuroscience of memory acquisition shows us that retention isn't about the intensity of a single exposure, it's about the frequency of exposure over time.
Ah, so it's a numbers game.
Exactly. It relies on spaced repetition. If you agonize over one word for 3 minutes, you've only seen it once. If you drop it after 9 seconds, you keep moving, you cover vastly more ground, and you will inevitably encounter that same word again tomorrow in a completely different context.
Because your brain is a pattern recognition machine.
Yes, it learns much faster by seeing a word 10 times in 10 different sentences than by staring at it once in isolation.
Okay, that makes total sense. It's about letting the brain build the web naturally through sheer volume rather than trying to hammer a single nail into a brick wall.
Mm-hmm.
So we've solved the mechanics of output. We know we need to speak from day one. We need to use chunking to lower cognitive load. We can leverage AI to bypass our anxiety. And we need to prioritize frequency over intensity.
But there is still one crucial element missing.
Right, because eventually you do have to leave the safety of your AI chatbot and talk to a real human being. And humans are unpredictable. Language isn't just about transferring data, it's about human connection. And to really understand the contrast between the mechanical learning we've been discussing and true organic social acquisition, we have to look at Vaughan.
Vaughan is perhaps the most illuminating case study in our entire deep dive. He represents the absolute pinnacle of social language learning.
So he's a guy from the United States, and his profession is cleaning carpets. But he happens to speak over 50 languages.
50.
Yeah, we're talking Navajo, Salish, Guarani, Russian, Finnish, Mandarin. And the wild part is he specifically chooses to clean carpets because the job gives him the flexibility to travel, set his own hours, and meet diverse clients in their homes so he can practice his languages with them.
When we compare Vaughan's approach to the traditional learning model, the differences are just profound. Traditional learning, as we've established, is mechanical. It relies on rote memorization, high-stakes testing, an obsession with grammatical perfection, and it results in a soaring, effective filter.
Right, lots of panic.
Yeah, but Vaughan's method strips all of that away. For him, language is simply a bridge to another human being.
And there's a really poignant context to his story in the sources.
Huh.
Vaughan suspects, and his mother agrees, that he is on the autism spectrum. Growing up, typical social interactions were a maze for him. Reading subtle facial expressions, understanding unspoken social cues, navigating small talk. All of that was chaotic and difficult. But language learning provided something different.
It provided a predictable framework. For Vaughan, speaking a foreign language became a rule-based social interaction that guaranteed a positive outcome. He realized early on that if he walked up to a stranger and simply made the effort to speak their native tongue, the reaction was almost universally one of surprise, warmth, and a smile.
It was like a cheat code for human connection.
Exactly. It gave him an instant, predictable belonging that he couldn't find through typical social avenues. He wasn't memorizing vocabulary to pass a high school AP exam or to sound impressive at a dinner party. He was acquiring language out of a deep desire to connect with people.
And the most incredible part is how this social motivation physically altered his brain. MIT researchers were so fascinated by him that they brought him in and put him inside an fMRI machine. They wanted to see what the brain of a 50-language super polyglot looks like when it's actually working.
Right.
Now, if I'm guessing, I would assume his language center was lighting up like a supernova, burning massive amounts of energy to juggle all those different vocabularies.
That is exactly what the researchers expected to find, but the scan revealed a massive twist. When Vaughan was performing complex language tasks, the language centers of his brain were actually smaller and significantly less active than those of a typical person who only speaks one language.
Wait, less active? How is that possible?
Because his brain has become hyper-efficient, Vaughan doesn't learn mechanically. He learns socially and contextually, in the real world, talking to people in grocery stores, chatting with clients while cleaning their carpets. Because of this, his brain doesn't have to burn immense caloric energy on forced rote retrieval. He relies on deep intuition.
He's recognizing the underlying architecture.
Yes, he spots patterns and shared grammatical structures across entire language families. When Vaughan decides to learn his 30th or 40th language, he isn't starting from scratch and memorizing tables. His brain simply takes a known template from a similar language and applies it to the new sounds. His neural pathways are essentially an optimized superhighway.
It's incredible. He is living proof that language is a living, breathing social tool. It's not a math equation to be solved on a whiteboard. And his brain's efficiency comes directly from the joy and the utility he gets from connecting with people, completely unburdened by the ego and anxiety that trap the rest of us.
It completely reframes what it means to be fluent.
So let's bring this all together for you, the listener. If you are stuck in that 5-year silence, if your brain turns to desert sand the moment a native speaker says hello, you have to change your paradigm. Stop being the passive food critic. You need to step into the kitchen.
They're cooking.
Yeah. You need Heinrich Schliemann's loud, fearless output to break through the wet cement of your hesitations. You could use modern AI to create a zero-judgment zone to build that retrieval muscle safely. But above all, you need Vaughn's mindset. You have to view language as a tool for deeply human social connection.
And this leaves us with a final, vital perspective to consider. When we look at Vaughn's life, we realize that speaking a foreign language isn't just about exchanging sterile data or proving how smart you are. It is about reaching someone's heart rather than just their head. Every time you refuse to speak because you're terrified of conjugating a verb incorrectly, you aren't just failing an imaginary test in your mind. You're actively denying yourself a human connection. So what conversation are you avoiding right now, just because you want to be perfect?